Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the first round of the Blitzfuel Invitational being held in New York City. Now, this is an International Master norm event, meaning the players who are below International Master are trying to make their norms and get the title. Now, playing in this event is the famous YouTuber and aspiring Grandmaster candidate, Levy. He has not played a lot of chess in recent times, and as such, he wants to play in a slightly easier event, try to build up some confidence, farm some rating points on the long road to obtaining the 2500 level elo mark. So first round of the event, Levy is playing with the black pieces against Pedro Espinosa, also from the United States, who is rated 2220 and a candidate master. Let's jump right into the action. So the game starts out with the move d4, and now Levy plays move f5. Now, one of the things is when you're playing as lower rated players, sometimes you play some openings that are a little bit dubious, a bit more on the wild side, because you want to create situations where there are major imbalances both in the pawn structure, but also in the piece values as well. So we get the Dutch defense from Levy. It's worth pointing out that his coach, Arthurs Nixons, has played this for his entire career. It's also worth pointing out that I revitalized this entire system in the 2010s when I played against players like Boris Gelfand, Vladimir Kramnik. I think I had it against Dingloren as well, amongst many others. So we get the Dutch defense. Now we get c4. Levy plays knight f6. G3, and now we get the move G6. Now this is what is known as the Leningrad variation of the Dutch defense. We get both sides fianchettoing the bishops. White puts the bishop on G2 and black puts the bishop on G7. Now the only difference between the Dutch defense and the King's Indian is that black has pushed this pawn to f5, violating the Benjamin Feingold rules of chess, because you push the pawn to f5 and you've created weaknesses on this diagonal. Now we get the move knight f3. Levy castles, we get knight c3, d6 castles, and here Levy plays move c6. Now in this position, there are three options. One of them is knight to c6, which I actually played in the last round of the 2019 US Chess Championship. I beat Jeffrey Zhang to win that title. There's a recap somewhere on my channel. I don't know where. I'll try to find it and link you guys. So knight c6 is one of the options. Queen to e8 is another line which is possibly playable. However, it's considered to be somewhat dubious if your opponent is well prepared. And then there is the third option, the most solid approach, with the move c6. After c6, we get the move d5, and now Levy plays the move e5. Here we get pawn takes pawn, the classic en passant move, or en passant move from Pedro Espinosa here, where he takes the pawn. If white were to not take the pawn here and say play rook b1, now black can play something like c5 here. Black is a nice center here with the pawns on d6, e5, and c5, and there are no issues whatsoever. So we get pawn takes pawn. Levy plays bishop takes pawn, and now we get the move b3 being played, and here Levy plays knight a6. Now at this point, both the players are moving relatively quickly. It's clear that Levy is perhaps a bit more prepared, but it seems that Pedro has most likely taken a page out of the Chessable course, where he is playing the system which is recommended by the famous American Grandmaster and one-time US champion Samuel Shanklin. Now we get the move bishop to b2 being played, and now Levy plays move knight e4. Now it's worth pointing out that in the past, I actually played the move rook to e8 in a game against Boris Gelfand in Vaikonze. I believe that it's a game that I won. I don't remember the exact specifics, but there are multiple ways to play it. So we get knight to a6. Now we have bishop b2. Levy goes knight to e4, and here we get the move knight d4, attacking this bishop on e6. Levy trades the knights on c3 and drops the bishop back to f7. Now, I don't critique Levy for trading the knights here. If you're unsure about this position, it makes sense to trade the knights, because even though bishop f7 is the correct move, you think that perhaps you're dropping a pawn on e4 and you're in a lot of trouble. But if white were to try and grab this pawn on e4, black can play the move queen to e7, attacking the bishop on e4. And when white drops the bishop back to, say, g2, you go c5, and all of a sudden we have the classic spaghetti-o moment. The knight on d4 is under attack. If you move it, you lose the bishop on b2. If you don't move the knight from d4, you lose the knight. So here you lose the knight or the bishop. You're losing material, and with it, you're going to lose the game. But Levy decides to trade on c3 instead. Completely understandable considering the circumstance. We get takes, bishop f7, and now we have the move queen c2. Levy plays the move knight to c5, trying to bring the knight from the rim back towards the center of the board. Now here Pedro plays the move rook a to d1. This move makes a lot of sense. Rook a d1, and here we get the move queen c7. Now, one thing that's really important in the game of chess when you think about how you're playing is that even if you study a course and you're trying to come up with some basic opening strategies, you really need to understand the pawn structure and the piece play, because if you don't understand it, bad things can happen right away. And as we're about to see, we get this move knight to f3, and this is the start of an erroneous plan by Pedro in this situation. What Pedro should have gone for here was played the move e3 for a couple of reasons. First of all, after you play e3 here, there's no longer a weakness. Say black goes rook e8, the pawn structure is very, very solid for white, but more importantly, you want to reroute your horse to e2 here, so that when the bishops get traded on c3, you'll notice that in this position, white controls the e4 square with the bishop, the knight, and the queen here, and also black will struggle to play the move d5. So black doesn't really get any grip in the center, and white's play here is very straightforward. For example, after you play a move like a5, white can go rook to d4, rook a d8, rook f d1, followed by queen to t2, lining up the legendary triple stack here, and black is simply worse in the position. Instead, Pedro tries to go for knight f3, offering the exchange of the bishops here, but there is a massive difference because after the trade and knight to e4, when you look at this position, black has a connect 4 from the pawn on h7 to the knight on e4. Additionally, white does not get the knight on c3, so after queen to b2 and rook e8, Levy is preparing to play d5 here, eliminating the one weakness and potentially creating a classic wooden shield. Now, let's just contrast that once again with this position. When you look at this position, there's no knight to e4. You cover with the knight and the bishop. Black can't go d5 because you're also covering that with the bishop, the knight, the pawn, and the rook. So now back to the game. When we get to this position after rook f8, now black has the great bash on e4. Levy is preparing to play d5. And at this point, even though the computer gives white a small advantage, it was clear to me while I was watching this and broadcasting on my Kick channel that Levy was in pretty good shape because the simple ideas here are not very logical. For example, computer likes knight to d4. But as a human, you're never going to play knight to f3, trading the bishops, like back here, moving the knight, and then coming back to d4 one move later. You're not going to do it. It simply doesn't make any sense. The other option that white can play after rook to e8 is to play something like knight to d2, trying to trade the knights, but even this move is a little bit passive. So Pedro plays the move h4. Levy plays the move d5, and now we get the move pawn takes pawn, bishop takes, and here we have the move knight g5. Now at this point, you'll notice that the computer gives white a very, very tiny advantage. The main reason being that a lot of material is going to come off in the center of the board, and you think that white should be able to go after a pawn on e4. After the move a5, we get takes, takes. Sorry, wrong line. What I was going to say is after the move queen to e5, white can trade everything off here, takes, play rook to d4, followed by the move e3, and black has a slight weakness on e4. The game goes on, but nonetheless, it should be slightly preferable for white. Now, I also think that Levy, who will no doubt do a recap of this game, at this point was already thinking of ways to keep pieces on the board more than trying to play the most precise move, because even though queen e5 is objectively the best move in this position, you trade off the queens, and when you're playing a lower rated player, you always want to try to keep pieces on the board, give them a chance to go wrong and make a mistake. So we get a5. Now we have this move knight to h3, and this is a very enterprising decision from Pedro Espinosa. He's trying to reroute the juicer to f4 to attack the bishop on d5, but it's a step in the wrong direction. Now here, what should have been played was probably knight takes knight, pawn takes, and now once again something like rook to d4, queen to e5, and something like e3, followed by rook f d1 or queen d2, and white is perhaps a teeny smidgen better here due to the weakness on e4, but again, it's nothing super special. Instead, we get knight h3, Levy goes a4, knight f4, and now the reason this knight is kind of misplaced on f4 here is that the bishop on f7 has a great scope diagonal towards the pawn on a2. This knight on f4 really has no good squares. You can't go to h5, you can't go to d5, and now this bishop is perfectly placed to start playing on the diagonal. Combine that with the potential open a file for the rook here, and Levy is looking very, very peachy. So now we get this move b4, and this is a move that is frankly, in my view, inexplicably bad, and I just don't understand how anybody in their right mind could play b4. Now, perhaps Pedro was worried that, say he plays a move like, let's just say rook d3, that black will trade, play something like knight c5, and he's left with a slight weakness on b3 because the knight and the bishop are attacking the pawn. But this pawn isn't really a big deal because you just go rook c3, you keep it guarded, and black also cannot really use this a file. But Pedro decides to play b4, and after b4 is played, Levy goes a3 here, a great move. Rook guards the pawn, you attack the queen, and after queen c2, Levy plays the move queen e7. Now, I was expecting Levy to play the move queen to e5 here, trying to go for this very nasty idea after rook d7 with queen to b2 here, because now you have a pawn that is 2 squares from the end of the board. If white tries to trade the queens here and go rook b7 after bishop a2, it's already spaghetti-o time once again. You're pushing your p, white will have to sack the rook and be suffering from a very heavy material deficit. So I would have liked to have seen queen to e5, but in a way, Levy's move is actually quite ingenious, because when he plays move queen to e7 here, he attacks the pawn on b4, but he also sets up a very devious trap, and his opponent promptly falls right into it. Now, in this position, if Levy's opponent were to trade the bishop for the knight here, white is still fine. Understandable, you don't want to trade, because now you've gotten rid of your fianchetto bishop on g2. There are weaknesses on the diagonal, and it just feels very unnatural, but the computer says this is okay. But Pedro plays the move that I think anyone would play in 5 seconds if they aren't studying the position super closely, which is very logical. Rook to d4, guard the pawn on b4, you centralize the rook, you're going to line up the double sack, and all roads lead to Rome. Except this is a severe blunder, and Levy Rosman, the famous YouTuber, does not miss his opportunity. He plays the move knight takes pawn on g3 here, sacking the knight. And now in this position, Pedro realizes that something really awful has happened, because if you take the horse, there is queen to e3, checking the king and attacking the rook. After white moves the king, black takes the rook. Black has a rook for a knight in this position, and black is well on his way to a win. So Levy is going to win his first game of the event, right? That's what it looks like. Pedro plays rook d1. Levy takes the pawn. We get takes. Rook d2. Levy checks. We get king h2. Now at this point, Levy is up 2 pawns here. He is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Pedro is 1, 2, 3, 4. White's king also looks like it should be a little bit weaker here. You have no pawn on g3 in this position, and you're thinking that objectively Levy will win. Well, one of the old sayings in the great game of chess is that the hardest thing to do in chess is to win a winning position. And Levy promptly starts to fall into the trap here, thinking he can do anything and win the game. He starts with the move rook to e7. Now, I would have liked to have seen Levy play the move queen to e7, bringing the queen back with the idea of playing rook a to d8. Say white goes king g1 and you get rook d8. If you can trade off all the heavy pieces, the towers and maybe the queens, you will win it due to the 2 extra juicers. Levy instead plays the move rook to e7 here rather abruptly, and his idea is he stops the kebab with rook to d7, and he just wants to go rook e8. Here, Pedro plays queen c3, and now Levy plays the move rook a to e8, and this is the start of going wrong very, very suddenly and really out of the blue. Now, the computer wants to move bishop takes a2 due to the pin of the rook here, and black is winning. Frankly, I don't think that Levy should ever even consider this move, because here you're up 2 pawns. You don't need to go for this. You're probably worried about a rook d8 idea. White is suddenly trying to attack your weak king on g8, and you probably could see the boogeyman. But that being said, it's still a very clean position, but Levy plays the move rook a to e8, and now after the move queen takes a3, suddenly Levy Rosman is hung a pawn on a3. He's only up 1 pawn now, and the game, as you can tell from the valuation bar, is not clear at all. So Levy plays the move rook to e2, which is the best move. We get rook takes rook, and now Levy's nerves start to fail him when he plays move queen e2. Now, I don't fault Levy for playing queen e2, frankly. At this point, I'm sure he's feeling very nervous, very unsure of himself. He had to have known that he hung the pawn on a3. He had done something wrong, and to follow it up with a move like rook takes e2 after the sudden loss of confidence or oversights on the past couple of moves is very hard to do, because after the move rook to d8 check, if you go king g7, white has b5, and suddenly the queen and the rook are infiltrating on the dark squares. Your king is very weak, and this is another good example of why you should never push your pawn to f5. So Levy decides to play queen takes instead. Now we get this move queen g3, and out of nowhere, you're thinking, well, Levy's still up 2 pawns and he's fine. But as you can tell from the valuation bar, Levy is not actually much better here. It's a very marginal advantage, even though he has 2 extra pawns. And the reason for that is the passive nature of this bishop on f7, the slightly weakened king side. There's no fianchetto bishop in front of the king. And we'll see, can Levy's opponent find the best moves? Now, Levy is a little bit unlucky here, I will say, because in this position, after queen takes e2, white literally has no other moves than queen g3. If you play king g3, there's going to be a queen e5 check. You go king g1 here, for example, black will check, and then go rook to e2 and win the game. So you have to play queen g3. It's literally the only move to guard the pawn, and after queen a2, rook d7, creating the classic kebab, is also an only move, hitting the bishop and the pawns on c6 and b7 here. So Levy goes queen to a6. Now we get the move h5, and Levy plays queen b5, and here Pedro plays the move queen c3. Now this move is an awesome move. It is the best move in the position, and it really shows why chess can be so mysterious at times, because when we look at this game, Pedro Espinosa, a candidate master, he's played some good moves, but he's made a couple of real howlers in this game, which are frankly inexplicable. But now he starts going on turbo mode. He plays queen c3, guarding the pawn on b4, and this is the only move in the position, or maybe there's one other move I guess you could take on g6 first, but it's one of only 2 moves to maintain the balance. So Pedro's found 1, 2, and now 3 only moves to keep the game going. Levy plays queen e2, we get pawn takes pawn, Levy takes, and now we get to move queen f6. Now this too, only move in the position, but again Levy is somewhat unlucky because since white has no ideas of attacking on the king side here, since he's traded the pawns, the last gasp here would be h6 going for a lolly checkmate, but after check, queen h3, queen g5, black is going to win the game. But after takes here, white really doesn't have options. Again, the pawn on f2 is under attack. You're down 2 pawns in this situation, so what do? You attack. You play queen to f6. Now we get queen to c4 from Levy, trying to guard the bishop, and now we have the move rook takes pawn. Levy plays queen f4 check, and now we get this move king to h3. Now king to g1 is a move which would save the game as well, but at this point the players are playing on increment for the entire game. They've reached move 40, but there is no additional time added. They're playing 90 minutes with a 30-second increment for move number 1, so with no extra time being added here, you kind of have to trust your gut and go with the flow. Now king g1 would save the game, but it's understandable that Pedro doesn't play it, because after check, bishop f1 check, king h2, it feels like maybe there's some way to win the game, like a check and something like queen g4, but white is always kind of surviving. The other reason you might not play it is you might think, well, black can sack the rook. The rook takes bishop, takes, and then something like bishop c4 check. But after king g1, queen g4, and king h2, as long as you keep the king on the dark squares where the bishop can't touch the king, you will save the game. Pedro instead plays king h3. Levy goes rook f8, guarding the bishop on f7, and now we get to move queen h4. Now this is the 5th only move in this game for Pedro to not lose on the spot. If white were to play any move except for queen h4, you would lose instantly. The sample line is queen takes pawn on c6, and now there's queen to h6 check, king to g3, f4, king g4, queen h5 check, king takes pawn, and after bishop d5, we've created the classic fossil. I attack the queen and I check the king at the same time. So Pedro finds queen h4. The only move is it stops g5. It also guards the pawn on f2 here, and now Levy plays move queen d6. Pedro goes queen g3, Levy plays f4, and now we get to move queen g5. Now, Pedro Espinosa has done a phenomenal job of defending. He has found 5 only moves to not lose this game up to this point, playing only on increment, but now he finally makes a blunder when he plays move queen g5. Queen to c3 would be the best move, but it's very understandable with this weak king on h3 all over the place. You feel like you're going to get checkmated, or there's going to be something really bad with f3, but after king g1, you're still threatening the checkmate on g7. So Pedro plays queen g5. Now Levy has a golden opportunity here to win the game, and I firmly believe that if Levy had found one of 2 critical moves, he would have won in this position. Those 2 moves being either queen to d4, guarding the pawn on f4 and attacking the juicer on f2, or the move queen to d2, also guarding and attacking this way, creating another right triangle. Instead, Levy ends up playing the very, very unfortunate move king to g7, and this is sort of a sign of the game, because when Levy goes king g7, he puts Pedro in another spot where there is literally only one move that you can play to not lose, and the move is actually very obvious because black is threatening to go rook to h8 and checkmate the white king. So Pedro plays bishop f3 here, stopping black from pushing the pawn forward, but also the king now has a retreat to the g2 square, and Levy has thrown everything away here. He has thrown it all away, and the game should be a draw. So now we get the move queen e6. Levy plays king g2. We get this move queen to d6 back from Levy, trying to guard the pawn on f4, and now Pedro plays move queen c5, offering the trade of the queens. Now Levy is still up 1 pawn here, but if the queens ever come off in the situation, the material is going to lead to a draw. Now Levy ultimately decides to trade the queens here. There isn't really much he can do. If he plays queen f6, for example, after the move bishop takes c6, if anybody is trying to win here, it's actually white due to the pin on the 7th rank. So Levy decides to trade the queens. He goes king f6. Now we get rook to b6, attacking the pawn on c6, g5, bishop takes, king e5, and here we have the move bishop f3. Levy goes bishop to e6, and now we get to move bishop to b7. And this is another excellent move from Pedro, because at this point it'd be very easy to lose control here, play something like bishop to e2, and after g4, let's just say you go f3, black goes g3 here with ideas like rook h8 and bishop d5, and it would be very, very easy for white to lose the game. But Pedro plays move bishop b7, keeping the bishop on this diagonal. Levy goes g4, and now after the move rook to b5 is played, the players agree to a draw. Levy decides he's finally had enough here. He doesn't really feel like he can win anymore. He could have tried to play on with a move like rook to f7 in this position, but after c6 check, king to d6, and rook g5 here, with the bishop guarding the pawn, the threats of c7, c8 in play, and the weaknesses on g4 and f4, Levy thought probably he could only be worse at this point. So after rook to b5, the players agree to a draw. For Pedro Espinosa, this is a phenomenal result. I'm extremely impressed by the amount of only moves that he found with limited time on the clock. Some of them were only moves, or very obvious moves, I should say. But overall, the fact that he found these moves speaks to how well he played this game, because psychologically it'd be very easy to be like, I blundered knight g3, I blundered the pawn on e2, I should just lose the game. But he keeps together, finds some remarkable resources, and I think it bodes very well for his chance to maybe get an IM norm in this event and or become an IM down the road, just because of the mental resolve that he shows in this game playing against Levy. So very impressive for Pedro Espinosa. For Levy, this has to come as a massive disappointment. He was playing someone 130 points lower rated. He's trying to build up his confidence before he goes back and plays in the GM norm events. It was not meant to be. Levy let it slip when he had his chances. Probably the last chance with queen d4, queen d2 isn't that big of a deal, but letting it slip when he was up to 2 pawns will definitely hurt for a bit. At any rate, for Levy, he does have a chance to come back tomorrow with 2 more games in this Blitzfuel Invitational and right the ship. So it's not the end of the world, but definitely a massive disappointment for Levy. So on that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap from the first round of the Blitzfuel Invitational being held in New York City. If you are not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back with some more great recaps and content in the coming days as we cover Levy's attempt to farm some opponents in this event. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Have a great rest of your evening, and I'll see you very soon. Bye.